Static crackles through the emergency dispatch recording. A man's voice, broken and desperate, cuts through the white noise. 911. What's your emergency? My daughters, they're gone. There's blood on the sand. Roberto Martinez's voice fractures on each word. In the background, sirens pierce the humid Florida dawn. Sir, I need you to stay calm. What's your location? Sunset Beach. Cedar Key. Please, there's so much blood. The line goes quiet except for Roberto's ragged breathing and the distant crash of waves. 40 years later, that recording would surface during an arrest that shattered everything the community thought they knew about the Martinez twins. The truth had been hiding behind a facade of respectability, protected by silence and corruption that reached into the highest levels of Cedar Key society. July 15, 1985, 11:47 p.m. Sarah Martinez pressed her foot harder on the gas pedal, her father's borrowed Chevy rumbling along the darkened coastal road. Beside her, Jessica adjusted the radio dial, catching fragments of Madonna and Prince between bursts of static. The twins shared that particular telepathy of siblings who had never spent a night apart. Jessica knew Sarah was nervous without looking at her white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel. "We don't have to do this," Jessica said, her coral pink sundress a splash of color against the bench seat. "Dad would understand if we changed our minds." Sarah shook her head, yellow fabric catching the dashboard light. "This is our last night before everything changes. I want to remember Cedar Key the way it really is." They had grown up in this small fishing town where everyone knew everyone, where Roberto Martinez had built his auto repair shop from nothing but determination and calloused hands. Their mother Elena still braided their hair each morning despite their protests, a ritual that connected them to the little girls they used to be. The beach access road appeared in the headlights, sandy and rutted from years of fishermen's trucks. Sarah parked near the dunes, and the twins grabbed their grandmother's hand-stitched quilt from the back seat. Salt air mixed with the sweet scent of night-blooming jasmine as they walked toward the water. "Remember when we used to hunt for shells here?" Jessica asked, spreading the quilt near the tide line. "You always found the perfect ones." "That's because you were too busy chasing hermit crabs." They settled onto the fabric, shoes kicked off, toes buried in cool sand. The Gulf stretched endlessly before them, moonlight creating a silver path across gentle swells. This beach had been their playground, their sanctuary, their escape from the pressures of being the Martinez twins, honor students, good daughters, examples for other families' children. "I'm scared about college," Sarah admitted, voice barely audible over the waves. "What if we're different people when we come back for Christmas?" Jessica reached for her sister's hand. "Impossible. We'll call each other every night. Besides, marine biology programs are basically the same everywhere. We'll probably learn identical things and bore each other with the same facts. Promise me something." Sarah's voice carried weight that made Jessica turn. "Promise we'll always tell each other the truth, no matter what happens." "I promise. But you're being weird tonight." Sarah was about to respond when headlights crested the dunes behind them. The twins turned, squinting against the sudden brightness. A vehicle approached slowly, deliberately, its engine a low growl in the night air. "Probably just someone else who couldn't sleep," Jessica said, but something in her voice suggested she didn't believe it. The headlights stopped 50 yards away, engine idling. Neither twin moved. The beach felt different now, smaller, more vulnerable. The sound of doors opening carried across the sand, followed by voices too distant to understand. "Sarah." Jessica's whisper held a note of warning. "I see them." 3 figures emerged from behind the headlight glare, moving with purpose toward the water's edge. The twins remained frozen on their quilt, suddenly aware of how exposed they were on the empty beach. At 12:23 a.m., Sarah and Jessica Martinez saw something that would cost them their lives. Tom Bradley, anchored a quarter-mile offshore in his fishing boat, heard the screams first. 2 voices, identical in pitch and terror, rising above the gentle surf. Then silence, so complete it seemed to absorb all sound from the coastline. Bradley waited, engine off, listening. Nothing but waves and wind through the dunes. He should have radioed the Coast Guard immediately. Instead, he pulled anchor and headed for deeper water, telling himself it was probably teenagers being teenagers. By the time guilt overcame his instinct for self-preservation, dawn was breaking over Cedar Key. Roberto Martinez found the scene at 6:15 a.m. The quilt lay crumpled near the waterline, one corner stained dark. Beach chairs, chairs that hadn't been there the night before, were overturned and scattered. Deep grooves in the sand led from the twins' position to where tire tracks marked a hasty departure. But it was Jessica's red bandana that broke him. The fabric she'd worn every day since 8th grade, tied carefully to a piece of driftwood like a flag of surrender. Or a cry for help. Roberto's knees hit the sand beside the makeshift marker. His daughter's laughter still echoed in his memory from dinner just hours before. Jessica teasing Sarah about her college orientation packet. Sarah retaliating by stealing the last piece of flan. "Elena," he whispered, though his wife was miles away, still sleeping peacefully in their bed. "Elena, they're gone." When Detective Frank Morrison arrived 30 minutes later, he found Roberto sitting motionless beside the bandana, staring at the gulf as if willing his daughters to emerge from its depths. Morrison had seen disturbed crime scenes before, but this felt different. The arrangement was too deliberate, too careful. Someone had taken time to stage this tableau, to send a message wrapped in cruelty. "Mr. Martinez," Morrison said gently, crouching beside the broken father. "I need you to step back while we process the scene." Roberto looked up with eyes that had aged decades and hours. "They were good girls, detective. Honor students. They never caused trouble." "I know. We're going to find them." Morrison meant it. He had a daughter Jessica's age, could imagine her excited chatter about college and boys and the future spread out like an endless highway before her. Someone had stolen that future from the Martinez twins, and Morrison would not let that stand. As the crime scene team photographed and measured and collected evidence, Morrison walked the perimeter of the beach. The morning sun revealed details that darkness had hidden: a partial footprint near the dunes, scratches on the seawall where something heavy had been dragged, fragments of glass that might have come from a broken headlight. But it was the footprints that made Morrison's pulse quicken. 3 distinct sets led from the vehicle to where the twins had been sitting. 3 sets returned to the tire tracks. The twins hadn't been alone when they died. Someone else had been there, someone who had walked away while Sarah and Jessica Martinez vanished into the humid Florida night. Morrison stared at those prints, understanding that this case would be different from anything he'd handled before. Somewhere in Cedar Key, a killer was watching the investigation unfold, confident that small-town police would never uncover the truth. They were wrong. What do you think happened to Sarah and Jessica that night? Share your theories in the comments below, because what we thought we knew about this case was completely wrong. Detective Frank Morrison had solved 127 cases in his 20-year career, but the Martinez twins would become the one that consumed his soul. What he discovered in those first crucial hours would haunt him for decades, and the clue he missed would change everything. The morning sun stretched long shadows across Sunset Beach as Morrison documented every grain of sand that told a story. His weathered hands moved methodically, photographing evidence that other investigators might overlook. 20 years of Florida crime scenes had taught him that evil often hid in plain sight, wearing the mask of respectability. But this case felt different from the moment he saw Roberto Martinez collapsed beside his daughter's belongings. Morrison's own daughter Katie had graduated with the twins just 3 weeks earlier. He remembered Sarah and Jessica from the ceremony, identical smiles beneath matching caps and gowns, their parents glowing with pride in the gymnasium bleachers. The connection made everything personal. Morrison's first interviews painted a picture of 2 teenagers who lived carefully structured lives. Sarah's best friend Ashley Cameron sat in the police station conference room, tears streaming down her cheeks as she recounted their last conversation. "They weren't supposed to go to the beach alone," Ashley said, twisting a tissue between her fingers. "We had plans to meet at Jake's bonfire, but Sarah called around 10 and said they changed their minds." She sounded excited about something, like they had a secret. "What kind of secret?" "I don't know. Sarah just said they wanted to do something special before college. Something that would help people." Morrison made a note. The twins had been honor students, the kind of teenagers who volunteered at animal shelters and tutored younger kids. What would they consider helping people that required secrecy? The gas station provided their last confirmed sighting. Jenny Phillips, working the night shift at Coastal Express, remembered the twins clearly. "Sweet girls," Jenny said, adjusting her reading glasses. Came in around 11:15. Sarah got her usual cherry Slurpee, large size. Jessica always went for blue raspberry, but she was trying to decide between that and grape. Sarah told her to stick with tradition. Morrison watched the security footage repeatedly. Sarah paying with exact change. Jessica spinning the Slurpee machine handle with practiced ease. Two teenagers making normal teenage choices, unaware they had less than an hour to live. The investigation expanded to encompass the twins' broader social circle. Tommy Henderson topped Morrison's suspect list, Sarah's ex-boyfriend who hadn't handled their breakup well. Morrison found him at his father's construction site, operating a backhoe with aggressive efficiency. "I already told the other cop," Tommy said, killing the engine. "I was home all night. Mom made dinner. We watched TV. I went to bed early." "What did you think when Sarah broke up with you?" Tommy's jaw tightened. "I thought she was making a mistake. Those girls always acted like they were better than everyone else. Going to college, becoming scientists, like Cedar Key wasn't good enough for them." Morrison noted the present tense. Even now, Tommy spoke about the twins as if they might walk around the corner at any moment. Eddie Vance presented a different kind of threat. The drifter lived in a makeshift camp among the mangroves, surviving on fish and whatever he could scavenge from tourists. Local teenagers whispered stories about Eddie's collection, items that disappeared from beach bags and hotel rooms. Morrison approached the camp with backup, not sure what they'd find. Eddie emerged from a lean-to constructed of driftwood and tarps, his eyes darting between the officers like a cornered animal. "I ain't done nothing wrong," Eddie said, hands raised defensively. "I just fish and mind my business." "Where were you Tuesday night?" "Same place I always am. Right here." The camp contained disturbing evidence. Women's jewelry arranged on a makeshift shelf, photographs cut from magazines, a journal filled with rambling observations about angels who visit the water. But Morrison's instincts told him Eddie was dangerous in a different way. His crimes were opportunistic, disorganized. The twins' disappearance showed planning and sophistication. Jimmy Walsh commanded Morrison's attention from their first meeting. The boat captain had a reputation for knowing everything that happened on Cedar Key's waters, yet he claimed ignorance about the twins' disappearance. "Terrible thing," Walsh said, leaning against the dock where his boat, Lucky Strike, bobbed in the gentle current. "Those girls had their whole lives ahead of them." Morrison studied Walsh's hands. Fresh scratches covered his knuckles, and sand remained embedded under his fingernails despite his claim of spending Tuesday night at Murphy's Tavern. "Rough week on the water?" Morrison asked, nodding toward the injuries. "You know how it is. Nets get tangled, equipment breaks. Part of the job." "What time did you leave Murphy's Tuesday night?" "Around 3. Mike Murphy can tell you. I was there most of the evening. Had a few too many, actually. Celebrating a good week of fishing." Morrison planned to verify the alibi, but something in Walsh's demeanor suggested layers beneath the surface. The boat captain's comments about the twins felt calculated, designed to demonstrate appropriate concern while revealing nothing useful. "Pretty girls like that shouldn't be out alone at night," Walsh continued. "Cedar Key ain't as safe as people think." The statement lodged in Morrison's mind like a splinter. How did Walsh know the twins had been alone? The community's response to the disappearance revealed the town's character. Elena Martinez transformed her grief into action, organizing search parties that covered every beach and backwater creek within 20 miles. She appeared on local television, her composure remarkable given the circumstances. "We know our daughters are out there somewhere," Elena said, standing outside St. Catherine's Catholic Church. "We won't stop looking until we bring them home." Roberto's reaction told a different story. Morrison found him in his garage workshop, sitting motionless beside the twins' shared Honda Civic. Tools lay scattered across his workbench, abandoned projects gathering dust. "They were supposed to take this car to college," Roberto said without looking up. "I was going to change the oil, check the brakes, make sure it was safe for the drive." Morrison understood that kind of helplessness, the feeling that all your preparation and protection meant nothing when evil decided to strike. Local teenagers created impromptu memorials around town. Sarah and Jessica's photographs appeared on telephone poles and storefront windows, surrounded by flowers and handwritten notes. The high school principal canceled remaining graduation celebrations, unable to imagine festivities while 2 students remained missing. As Morrison expanded his investigation, disturbing patterns emerged. 3 other young women had vanished along the Gulf Coast over the past 5 years, cases handled by different jurisdictions with minimal communication between departments. Morrison spread their files across his desk, looking for connections. Melissa Rodriguez, age 19, disappeared from Steinhatchee in 1982. Jennifer Walsh, 20, vanished from Horseshoe Beach in 1983. Christine Thompson, 18, went missing from Sewanee in 1984. All were college-aged. All disappeared near water. All cases went cold within months. Morrison plotted Jimmy Walsh's fishing routes on a coastal map. The correlation made his pulse quicken. Walsh's boat had docked in each town within days of every disappearance. The detective worked 16-hour days, driven by the conviction that Sarah and Jessica deserved justice. His wife Linda worried about his obsession, but Morrison couldn't shake the image of Roberto Martinez sitting beside his daughter's abandoned car. On July 28, 13 days after the twins vanished, Morrison's phone rang at 2:17 a.m. "Stop digging into Jimmy Walsh, or you'll end up like those girls." The line went dead before Morrison could respond. He'd been recording all calls related to the case, a precaution that now seemed prescient. Morrison played the message repeatedly, analyzing every inflection and background sound. The voice was male, local accent, deliberately disguised but familiar. Morrison's blood chilled as recognition dawned. The caller knew police procedures, understood how investigations worked. Someone from his own department was involved in covering up the truth. Detective Morrison was building a case that could finally bring justice, but he had no idea he was being watched. If you're enjoying this investigation, hit that subscribe button because this case takes turns that no one saw coming. Morrison stared at the recording equipment, understanding that everything had changed. The Martinez twins hadn't just witnessed a crime. They'd stumbled into something that reached into the heart of Cedar Key's law enforcement. Someone was willing to kill to protect that secret, and Morrison had just painted a target on his own back. The anonymous threat should have warned Detective Morrison away, but instead it convinced him he was getting close to the truth. What he uncovered about Cedar Key's dark underbelly would shatter the town's innocent facade forever. Morrison arrived at the station before dawn, the recorded threat playing in his mind like a broken record. Someone wanted him to stop investigating Jimmy Walsh, which meant Walsh was either guilty or connected to whoever was. Either way, Morrison intended to find out which. Cedar Key looked different now through the detective's eyes. The picturesque fishing village that drew tourists and retirees revealed its shadows after sunset. Morrison began noticing things he'd previously overlooked: expensive boats moored at private docks, cash transactions at waterfront businesses, and late-night meetings in places where honest fishermen had no business gathering. His investigation into the town's financial records uncovered patterns that raised questions. Several prominent citizens had made large cash deposits in recent years, including City Councilman Bill Henderson, Tommy's father. The deposits coincided with unexplained improvements to their properties and lifestyles that seemed inconsistent with their reported incomes. Morrison began surveillance of Jimmy Walsh's activities, documenting the boat captain's movements with telephoto lenses and careful notes. Walsh's vessel made regular trips to coordinates that didn't correspond to any known fishing grounds. Morrison photographed meetings between Walsh and unknown individuals on isolated docks, exchanges that involved briefcases and handshakes, but no visible fishing equipment. The paranoia crept in gradually. Morrison started checking his car for tampering before each drive, varying his routes home, and keeping duplicate case files in a personal safe. The feeling of being watched became constant, a weight between his shoulder blades that never fully lifted. Margaret Walsh appeared at the police station on a Tuesday morning when most people were at work or school. The bruising around her left eye was fresh, deep purple that makeup couldn't completely hide. She sat across from Morrison in the interview room, hands folded carefully in her lap. "I need to report a domestic disturbance," she said quietly. Morrison activated the recording equipment. "Tell me what happened, Mrs. Walsh." "Jimmy's been different since those girls went missing." Angry all the time. He drinks more, sleeps less. Last night She touched her cheek gingerly. He's never hit me before. Never. What set him off? Margaret's voice dropped to a whisper. He's been having nightmares. Screaming in his sleep about keeping them quiet. When I asked who he meant, he got furious. Said I asked too many questions. Morrison leaned forward. Mrs. Walsh, do you think your husband was involved in Sarah and Jessica's disappearance? Tears filled her eyes. I don't know, but he's scared of something, and Jimmy Walsh has never been scared of anything in his life. Morrison began preparing paperwork for domestic violence charges, but Margaret suddenly stood up. I can't do this, she said, backing toward the door. I fell downstairs. That's what happened. I fell downstairs. She was gone before Morrison could stop her, leaving him with another piece of a puzzle that seemed to grow more complex by the hour. The breakthrough came from 12-year-old Bobby Chun, whose family operated the bait shop near Sunset Beach. Bobby approached Morrison outside the shop, looking nervously over his shoulder. My dad said I shouldn't talk to police, Bobby said, but I think I saw something important. Morrison crouched to Bobby's eye level. What did you see? I was fishing Tuesday night when those girls disappeared. Mom thinks I was asleep, but I snuck out. I saw a truck leaving the beach real fast, around 1 in the morning. Can you describe it? Dark-colored, maybe blue or black. But I know whose it was because of the bumper. It had this weird chrome thing with skulls on it. Belongs to Crazy Eddie who lives in the swamp. Morrison's investigation had focused on Jimmy Walsh, but Bobby's testimony shifted everything. Eddie Vance's truck matched the description, and the custom bumper made identification certain. Morrison returned to Eddie's camp with new purpose. The drifter emerged from his lean-to shelter, eyes darting between the detective and his escape routes through the mangroves. You're back, Eddie said. Figured you would be. The camp was more disturbing in daylight. Eddie's collection covered makeshift shelves, women's jewelry arranged by color, photographs of young girls cut from magazines, seashells sorted by size and type. A water-stained journal lay open on a tree stump, filled with rambling entries about angels who visit the water and messages from the deep. Tell me about Tuesday night, Eddie. Can't. Wasn't here Tuesday night. Morrison pulled out his notepad. Where were you? County lockup. Got arrested Monday for public intoxication. Didn't get out until Wednesday morning. Sheriff's got the paperwork. Morrison verified the alibi within an hour. Eddie Vance had been in jail during the twins' disappearance, making him another dead end in an investigation full of them. But the misdirection troubled Morrison. Someone had planted evidence pointing toward Eddie, someone who knew about his truck and his disturbing collection. The real killer was using Eddie as a convenient scapegoat while covering their own tracks. Morrison's review of the case files revealed systematic tampering. Witness statements had been altered or removed, evidence logs showed gaps, and several key interviews had been mysteriously lost. Someone with access to police records was protecting the real perpetrator. The personal threat materialized on a Thursday evening when Morrison's daughter Katie answered their home phone. Tell your daddy to stop asking questions about dead girls, a voice whispered before the line went dead. Morrison installed security systems and considered sending Katie to stay with her aunt in Jacksonville, but his daughter refused to be intimidated. I'm not running away because some coward makes phone calls, Katie said, her jaw set with determination that reminded Morrison of himself. Besides, if we leave, who's going to find Sarah and Jessica? Morrison realized the killer was escalating, moving from anonymous threats to targeting his family. But he also understood that backing down now would mean the twins would never receive justice. His investigation led him to the Cedar Key Records office, a cramped building where property deeds and business licenses gathered dust in metal filing cabinets. Morrison was researching ownership of waterfront properties when he discovered something that made his hands tremble. A deed transfer dated July 20th, 1985, just 5 days after the twins disappeared. Someone had sold a secluded property on Shell Island for cash, well below market value. The transaction suggested desperation, a need to liquidate assets quickly. Morrison stared at the seller's signature, his blood turning cold as recognition dawned. The name belonged to someone he'd never suspected, someone who had been helping with the investigation from the very beginning. Morrison was getting close to the truth, but the killer was watching his every move. What do you think? Was Jimmy Walsh innocent, or was this all an elaborate cover-up? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to like this video if you want to see how this twisted case unfolds. Dr. Richard Edmonds had signed the deed with the same careful handwriting that appeared on medical reports and police consultation forms. The respected physician who had examined crime scene evidence and provided expert opinions had been hiding the most crucial secret of all. Morrison sat in his car outside the records office, understanding that everything he thought he knew about the case was wrong. The twins hadn't been killed by a boat captain or a drifter or an angry ex-boyfriend. They'd been murdered by someone the community trusted implicitly, someone who had used his position to misdirect the investigation from the very first day. 3 months after Sarah and Jessica Martinez vanished, fishermen made a discovery that would change everything. But the evidence they found raised more questions than answers, and the truth was more twisted than anyone could have imagined. Dale Murphy guided his boat through the Crystal River backwaters, his 16-year-old son Jason checking nets they'd set the previous evening. October fog clung to the water's surface, creating an otherworldly landscape where cypress trees emerged like ghosts from the mist. "Dad, there's something caught in the net," Jason called from the bow. Dale throttled down, drifting closer to where his son was untangling what looked like fabric from the mesh. A waterlogged canvas bag bobbed against their hull, heavy with whatever contents remained after months in salt water. "Probably just trash some tourist threw overboard," Dale said, but something about the bag's deliberate weight suggested otherwise. Jason hauled it aboard, water streaming from canvas that had once been white but now carried the stains of time and tide. The bag's zipper still functioned despite the extended submersion, and when Jason opened it, both father and son understood they'd found something significant. Inside were items that should have dissolved or scattered months ago: plastic identification cards protected by waterproof sleeves, cash that had survived because it was wrapped in additional plastic, and credit cards bearing the names Sarah Elena Martinez and Jessica Marie Martinez. But it was the note that made Dale immediately radio the Coast Guard. Written on paper that had somehow survived the water damage, shaky handwriting spelled out words that transformed the twins' disappearance from mystery to murder. They saw something they shouldn't have. Morrison arrived at Crystal River within 2 hours, his heart racing as he examined the bag's contents under controlled conditions. The evidence suggested someone had tried to destroy these items, then changed their minds and preserved them instead. The plastic wrapping was deliberate, designed to protect rather than dispose. Dr. Edmonds conducted the forensic analysis with his usual thoroughness, though Morrison noticed the physician seemed unusually interested in the bag's origin and discovery location. The identification cards showed deliberate damage, scratches and gouges that appeared intentional rather than environmental. Someone tried to destroy these, Dr. Edmonds concluded, but the damage is superficial, almost as if they wanted to make it appear worse than it actually was. Fingerprint analysis revealed multiple sets of prints. The twins were present, as expected, but there were also partial prints from at least 2 unknown individuals. Most disturbing was the discovery of blood on Jessica's driver's license, type O negative, which didn't match either twin's medical records. The note became Morrison's obsession. Handwriting analysis suggested extreme stress during composition, with irregular letter formation indicating the writer was either injured, terrified, or both. The paper was traced to a specific brand sold at only 3 regional locations: Murphy's Tavern, the Cedar Key General Store, and a gas station in Chiefland. Morrison began constructing a timeline where the twins witnessed something horrific, were taken captive, and someone, possibly one of the twins themselves, managed to leave this message before being silenced forever. His renewed investigation into Cedar Key's criminal underbelly revealed connections that reached far beyond local drug smuggling. The town's remote location and numerous hidden coves made it perfect for South American cocaine operations, but Morrison discovered the network also facilitated arms dealing, money laundering, and human trafficking. The twins may have witnessed a murder connected to these activities, their amateur investigation accidentally documenting crimes that people would kill to protect. Morrison's search for Tommy Henderson took 3 weeks. The twins' ex-boyfriend had left Cedar Key immediately after their disappearance, taking a job at a construction site near Gainesville. Morrison found him operating heavy machinery, his face tanned and lean from months of outdoor work. "I wondered when you'd track me down," Tommy said during their interview at a roadside diner. "I should have called when I heard about the bag, but I was scared." "Scared of what?" Tommy looked around the empty restaurant before answering. "Sarah called me on July 14th, the day before they disappeared. She was excited about something, more excited than I'd ever heard her. Said she and Jessica had found something that would make them rich." Morrison leaned forward. "What kind of something?" "Evidence about illegal stuff happening at the beaches. Sarah said they'd been watching and photographing activities for over a week. She mentioned boats coming in at night, men with guns, packages being transferred. But she was being weird about it, like she was scared someone might be listening." "Why didn't you tell me this before?" Tommy's face flushed. "Because I thought she was making it up to impress me. Sarah always wanted to be important, to do something that mattered. I figured it was just teenager stuff." Morrison's investigation of the twins' bedroom, conducted with Elena's reluctant permission, revealed the scope of their amateur detective work. Hidden beneath Jessica's mattress was a 35mm camera and several rolls of undeveloped film. The twins had been more thorough than anyone suspected. When processed, the photographs told a story that made Morrison's blood run cold. Images of boats arriving under cover of darkness, men transferring packages from vessels to trucks, license plates clearly visible in the moonlight, and faces that could be identified with proper enhancement. One photograph stopped Morrison completely. Jimmy Walsh stood on a dock, shaking hands with two men Morrison didn't recognize. The timestamp showed July 10th, 1985, 5 days before the twins disappeared. This wasn't a random crime of opportunity. The twins had been surveilling the smuggling operation for at least a week, and their elimination had been carefully planned. Morrison spread the photographs across his desk, understanding that Sarah and Jessica had documented a criminal enterprise that reached into the highest levels of Cedar Key society. They'd been so close to exposing the truth that someone decided they had to die. The emotional devastation of this revelation hit the Martinez family like a physical blow. Elena sat in her kitchen, staring at photographs her daughters had risked their lives to take. "They were trying to help people," Elena whispered. "They thought they were doing something good." Roberto's reaction was more volatile. He stood in his garage workshop, hands clenched into fists as he processed the reality that his daughters had been murdered for their courage. "They were children," he said, voice breaking. 18 years old, and they thought they could fight criminals. Why didn't they come to us? Why didn't they ask for help?" Morrison prepared arrest warrants for Jimmy Walsh and the other individuals identified in the photographs. The evidence was overwhelming. The twins had documented criminal activities, and Walsh's participation was undeniable. But as Morrison finalized the paperwork, his phone rang with news that changed everything. "Detective Morrison? This is Deputy Collins. We found Jimmy Walsh dead in his boat about an hour ago. Looks like a heart attack, but you're going to want to see this." Morrison arrived at the marina to find Walsh's vessel secured as a crime scene. The boat captain's body lay on the deck, face peaceful despite the circumstances. But the preliminary examination revealed details that suggested this was no natural death. "Look at his left arm," the deputy said, pointing to small puncture wounds near the elbow. "Fresh needle marks. And his pupils are pinpoint, classic sign of sedative overdose." Dr. Edmonds arrived to examine the body, his professional demeanor unchanged despite the suspicious circumstances. But Morrison noticed the physician's hands trembled slightly as he documented the needle marks. "Preliminary assessment suggests cardiac arrest," Dr. Edmonds reported. "But we'll need a full autopsy to determine the exact cause." Morrison stared at Walsh's body, understanding that someone had silenced the boat captain permanently. The real mastermind behind the twins' murder was still alive, still operating, and probably closer than Morrison had ever imagined. Sarah and Jessica thought they were going to be heroes, but they had no idea how deep this conspiracy went. If this story is keeping you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button and subscribe for more cold cases that will blow your mind. Walsh's death meant the investigation had to start over, but Morrison now knew the twins had been killed to protect a criminal operation that involved people he'd probably questioned, people he might even trust. Someone with medical knowledge had eliminated Walsh before he could talk, and that same person was watching Morrison's every move. The truth was closer than he realized, hidden behind a facade of respectability that had fooled everyone in Cedar Key for years. Jimmy Walsh's death should have been the end of the investigation, but Detective Morrison refused to let the case die with him. His relentless pursuit of justice would cost him everything: his health, his career, and nearly his life. The autopsy results arrived on a gray November morning, delivered by Dr. Edmonds with the clinical detachment that had made him Cedar Key's most respected physician. Morrison studied the report in his cramped office, coffee growing cold as the implications became clear. Massive insulin injection, Morrison said, looking up at Dr. Edmonds. But Walsh wasn't diabetic. Correct. The dosage was approximately 10 times what would be administered to a diabetic patient. It caused immediate cardiac arrest, which would appear natural without close examination. Morrison noted the injection site details. Says here there are defensive marks around the puncture wound. Minor abrasions consistent with struggle. Walsh fought back, but insulin works quickly once it enters the bloodstream. The detective leaned back in his chair, processing what he'd learned. Someone with medical knowledge and access to pharmaceutical supplies had murdered Jimmy Walsh. The list of suspects had just become very short and very dangerous. Morrison's home life began cracking under the pressure of his obsession. Linda found him at the kitchen table at 3 a.m., surrounded by crime scene photographs and witness statements, his eyes red from exhaustion. "Frank, this has to stop," she said, wrapping her robe tighter against the morning chill. "You're killing yourself over this case. 2 girls are dead, Linda. Murdered. And their killer is walking free. What about your own daughter? Katie's having nightmares about those twins. She's afraid the same thing will happen to her." Morrison looked up from his papers, seeing his wife clearly for the first time in weeks. Linda's face showed strain he'd been too consumed to notice, dark circles under her eyes, worry lines that hadn't been there before the case began. "Maybe you should transfer to another department," Linda continued. "Let someone else handle this." "I can't do that." "You won't do that." "There's a difference." Morrison's investigation revealed systematic corruption within the Cedar Key Police Department. Evidence from the twins' case had been altered or destroyed, witness statements had vanished from official files, and several people who'd provided information had either left town or suddenly recanted their stories. The pattern suggested someone with administrative access was protecting the real killer, someone who understood police procedures and knew which evidence posed the greatest threat. Morrison began keeping duplicate files at home, hidden in a floor safe his father had installed decades earlier. His breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Sarah Chun, who ran a small family practice near the waterfront, contacted Morrison after reading about Walsh's death in the local newspaper. "I treated Jimmy Walsh for anxiety and depression in the weeks before he died," Dr. Chun explained during their meeting at her clinic. "He was terrified of something, claiming someone was threatening to kill him if he talked about what happened to those girls." Morrison activated his tape recorder. Did he identify who was threatening him? "He kept referring to the real boss, but never gave me a name. Jimmy begged me to contact the FBI, said local police couldn't be trusted. I thought he was having a psychological breakdown." Dr. Chun provided Morrison with detailed notes about Walsh's mental state. The boat captain had described nightmares where he heard the twins screaming, guilt that was eating him alive, and terror that he would be silenced like others who'd tried to leave the operation. "Jimmy told me he'd been forced to help transport the girls after they witnessed a murder," Dr. Chin continued. "But he swore he never hurt them. Said the real killer was someone the community trusted, someone who'd been planning their deaths for days." Morrison's investigation led him to review security footage from every business within 20 miles of Sunset Beach. At a gas station 12 miles away, he found what he'd been looking for: a vehicle matching Walsh's truck captured at 2:15 a.m. on July 16th. But digital enhancement revealed something that made Morrison's pulse quicken. The person behind the wheel wasn't Jimmy Walsh. The driver was smaller, wearing what appeared to be a medical mask or surgical covering that obscured their features. Morrison's focus shifted to the Cedar Key Medical Clinic, where he obtained employee records and schedules for July 15, 1985. Several staff members had access to insulin and sedatives, but one name stood out: Patricia Edmonds, the head nurse and Dr. Edmonds' wife. Patricia had been scheduled for the night shift on July 15th, but had called in sick, the first time she'd missed work in over 5 years. Morrison's investigation of her financial records revealed she'd been having money problems, but had made several large cash deposits in the weeks following the twins' disappearance. Morrison found Patricia at her home, a modest house behind the medical clinic where she lived with her husband and 2 young children. She answered the door with trembling hands, her face pale as she recognized the detective. "Mrs. Edmonds, I need to ask you some questions about the night Sarah and Jessica Martinez disappeared." Patricia's composure cracked immediately. Through tears, she admitted her involvement, but claimed she'd been coerced. "I was forced to provide medical supplies," she whispered, constantly checking the windows as if expecting someone to be watching. "Drugs to sedate people during transport. I didn't want to, but they threatened my children." "Who threatened you?" "I can't say. If I tell you, my family will be killed." Patricia confirmed that Walsh had been murdered to prevent him from talking, but she refused to identify who had ordered the killing. Her terror was genuine, the fear of someone who'd seen what happened to people who crossed the wrong person. "Jimmy tried to protect those girls," Patricia said, "but there was nothing he could do. The decision had already been made." Morrison was preparing to press harder when pain exploded across his chest like lightning. His vision blurred, his left arm went numb, and he collapsed beside his car in the clinic parking lot. Patricia Edmonds found him minutes later, unconscious and barely breathing. She performed CPR while calling for an ambulance, her medical training overriding her fear as she fought to save the detective's life. As Morrison drifted in and out of consciousness during the ambulance ride, he grabbed his partner's shirt and whispered words that would haunt Detective Ray Collins for years. "The doctor. Check the doctor." Morrison's heart attack was massive, requiring emergency surgery and weeks of recovery. During his hospitalization, the Martinez case was transferred to Detective Collins, a younger officer who lacked Morrison's experience and passion for complex investigations. Collins reviewed the evidence with fresh eyes, but different priorities. Faced with political pressure to close the case and lacking Morrison's institutional knowledge, he reached conclusions that satisfied his superiors but ignored crucial details. The official report stated that Sarah and Jessica Martinez had been murdered by Jimmy Walsh in connection with drug smuggling activities. Walsh's death was ruled natural causes brought on by stress and guilt. The case was officially closed, filed away in storage where it would gather dust for decades. Morrison's forced retirement came on a cold February morning in 1986. His weakened heart made active police work impossible, and his obsession with the twins' case had made him a liability in the eyes of department administrators. He cleared out his desk methodically, packing boxes of unofficial notes and evidence he'd gathered independently. Morrison had made copies of everything: photographs, witness statements, financial records, creating a shadow investigation that existed outside official channels. As he carried the last box to his car, Morrison made a silent vow to Sarah and Jessica Martinez. His badge and gun were gone, but his commitment to justice remained unchanged. He would continue investigating until the truth emerged, no matter how long it took. Morrison's garage became his unofficial office, walls covered with photographs and timelines that traced the conspiracy he believed had murdered the twins. His health limited his ability to pursue active leads, but he maintained contact with key figures in the case, waiting for someone to break the silence that protected their killers. Years passed. Morrison's marriage survived, but barely. Katie grew up and became a lawyer, her choice of profession influenced by her father's quest for justice. Morrison aged prematurely, his heart condition worsening with each anniversary of the twins' disappearance. In 1993, 8 years after the murders, Morrison received an unexpected visitor. Margaret Walsh appeared at his door on a rainy Thursday evening, looking over her shoulder as if she expected to be followed. "Mr. Morrison," she said, "I need to tell you something about Jimmy. Something he confessed to me before he died." Morrison invited her inside, his pulse quickening despite his damaged heart. Margaret sat on the edge of his couch, hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Jimmy told me who really killed those girls," she began. "He made me promise never to tell, but I can't live with this secret anymore." Before she could continue, Margaret suddenly stood and moved to the window, her face draining of color. "That car," she whispered. It's been following me since I left home. They know I'm here. They know I'm talking to you." Morrison looked outside to see a dark sedan parked across the street, its occupants obscured by tinted windows. "I have to go," Margaret said, backing toward the door. "I shouldn't have come. I've put us both in danger." Morrison's dedication to Sarah and Jessica cost him everything, but he never gave up believing that justice would eventually come. If you admire his determination, hit that subscribe button because this story is far from over. Margaret fled into the night, leaving Morrison with more questions than answers. Someone was still watching, still protecting the secret that had cost the Martinez twins their lives. The truth was closer than ever, but it remained protected by fear and corruption that reached deeper into Cedar Key than Morrison had ever imagined. For nearly 40 years, Cedar Key kept its darkest secret buried beneath decades of silence. But secrets have a way of surfacing, and the truth about Sarah and Jessica Martinez was about to emerge in the most unexpected way. 2020. Roberto Martinez moved carefully through the house he'd shared with Carmen for 15 years, his arthritis making each step deliberate. At 74, he carried the weight of decades like stones in his chest, but the hardest burden remained the same: 2 daughters who would forever be 18 years old. Their bedroom stayed exactly as they'd left it. College acceptance letters from the University of Florida hung on the bulletin board, edges yellowed with age but still proudly displayed. Sarah's marine biology textbooks sat stacked on the desk beside Jessica's collection of seashells, each item a monument to futures that would never unfold. Carmen understood without explanation. She'd lost her first husband to cancer, knew how grief carved permanent spaces in the heart that new love couldn't fill. When her grandchildren visited, they heard stories about their angel aunts, the brilliant sisters who would have been marine biologists, who would have changed the world. "Tell us about the time they found the dolphin," 8-year-old Sophia would beg, and Roberto would smile through tears as he recounted how the twins had spent an entire summer nursing an injured dolphin back to health. Carmen's daughter Maria had given Roberto the grandchildren he'd never expected to have, but their joy came wrapped in guilt. How could he celebrate new life when his daughters remained unavenged? How could he move forward when justice stood frozen in time? Frank Morrison's garage looked like the workspace of a man possessed. 40 years of investigation covered every surface: photographs, timelines, witness statements, and evidence that official investigators had ignored or buried. His marriage to Linda had ended in 1998, another casualty of his obsession with the Martinez case. But his daughter Katie understood. Now a successful attorney in Tallahassee, she visited monthly to help with legal research and filing requests for information that authorities consistently denied. Morrison's heart disease had worsened over the years, but his mind remained sharp, his commitment unwavering. "Dad, you need to take care of yourself," Katie said during one visit, noting how thin he'd become. "The twins wouldn't want you to sacrifice your health for them." "They were good girls," Morrison replied, the same words he'd spoken thousands of times. They deserved better than what they got. Morrison maintained contact with key figures from the original investigation. Dr. Sarah Chun had retired but still remembered Jimmy Walsh's terror in his final weeks. Margaret Walsh remained in Cedar Key, a widow who attended daily mass and volunteered at local charities while carrying secrets that were slowly destroying her from within. The official case file had been deliberately buried beneath layers of bureaucratic obstruction. Multiple Freedom of Information Act requests had been denied or ignored, and several key pieces of evidence had vanished during convenient office relocations. Detective Ray Collins, who'd officially closed the case, had risen through the ranks to become sheriff and actively discouraged any attempts to reopen the investigation. That case was solved decades ago, Collins would tell reporters during rare interviews. Jimmy Walsh killed those girls, then died of guilt and stress. Opening old wounds serves no purpose. But Morrison knew better. He'd documented every inconsistency, every covered-up clue, every witness who'd suddenly changed their story or left town. The evidence pointed to a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of Cedar Key society, protected by people who'd grown wealthy and powerful on blood money. Margaret Walsh lived in the same modest house behind the medical clinic where she'd worked for 30 years before retirement. At 71, She moved like someone carrying invisible weight, her shoulders perpetually hunched as if defending against expected blows. She attended St. Catherine's Catholic Church daily, sitting in the same pew where she'd prayed for forgiveness for 4 decades. The priest had grown accustomed to her tearful confessions about unnamed sins, her pleas for guidance on whether truth was worth the destruction it might cause. Margaret had never remarried despite opportunities. How could she build a life with someone new when her past was built on lies and covered-up murders? How could she find peace when 2 innocent girls remained unavenged because of her silence? The dreams had intensified with age. Sarah and Jessica appeared to her regularly now, standing at the foot of her bed with accusation in their eyes. They never spoke, but Margaret understood their message. Justice delayed was justice denied, and time was running out for the truth to emerge. In 2023, Katie Morrison filed a comprehensive Freedom of Information Act request that used legal language specific enough to pierce the bureaucratic shields protecting the case. Among the documents finally released was a medical examiner's report that had never been included in the official file. The report revealed that Jimmy Walsh's body had shown defensive wounds consistent with a struggle, and that trace amounts of sedatives were found in his system, evidence that contradicted the official ruling of natural death. Someone had fought to hide this information for nearly 40 years. Morrison studied the document with renewed energy, understanding that modern legal pressure had finally cracked the wall of silence. If this report had been suppressed, what other evidence remained hidden in files marked classified or lost? Roberto Martinez found solace in his grandchildren, but struggled with survivors' guilt that intensified with each celebration. Sophia's birthday parties, Maria's graduation from nursing school, family dinners where laughter filled rooms that should have included Sarah and Jessica. Each moment of joy felt like betrayal. They would want you to be happy, Carmen told him during quiet evenings when grief settled over him like fog. Your daughters loved you. They wouldn't want their deaths to destroy your life. I know, Roberto would answer. But knowing and feeling are different things. Morrison's health declined steadily, but he experienced renewed purpose when Detective Amanda Rivers contacted him in late 2023. Rivers had been assigned to digitize old case files and had discovered discrepancies in the Martinez investigation that demanded explanation. Mr. Morrison, Rivers said during their first meeting in his garage office, I've been studying this case for months. The official conclusions don't match the evidence. Morrison felt something he hadn't experienced in years, hope. Rivers represented a new generation of investigators equipped with modern technology and unencumbered by old loyalties or corruption. I've got 40 years of work here, Morrison said, gesturing to his walls covered with evidence. Everything the official investigation ignored or buried. If you're willing to listen, I'll tell you what really happened to those girls. Their partnership represented more than collaboration. It was the passing of a torch from one generation to the next, from an old detective whose body was failing to a young investigator whose commitment to justice remained untested but fierce. Rivers reviewed Morrison's unofficial files with growing amazement. The depth of his investigation, the connections he'd documented, the evidence he'd preserved. It painted a picture of conspiracy and corruption that reached far beyond a simple murder case. The criminal network that had operated in Cedar Key during the 1980s had evolved and expanded over the decades. Several former participants had become prominent citizens, using their ill-gotten gains to build legitimate businesses and gain political influence. The twins' murder was just one crime in a pattern of violence and corruption that continued to this day. Margaret Walsh watched news coverage of cold cases being solved through modern forensic techniques with growing anxiety. DNA evidence and digital analysis could finally provide proof needed to expose the truth about Sarah and Jessica, but revelation would destroy innocent family members and expose her own role in covering up crimes. She sat in her living room, rosary beads clicking between her fingers as she wrestled with a decision that had haunted her for 40 years. Outside, Cedar Key looked peaceful in the evening light, a picturesque fishing village where tourists came to escape the complexities of modern life. But Margaret knew the truth. Evil had roots that ran deep here, protected by silence and fear that had allowed it to flourish unchecked for decades. The twins deserved justice, and time was running out for her to provide it. Margaret reached for her phone with trembling hands, dialing the number she'd memorized from newspaper articles about Detective Rivers. Her voice shook as she spoke words that would change everything. Detective Rivers? This is Margaret Walsh. I need to tell you the truth about Jimmy Walsh and those girls. But I need protection because the person who really killed them is still alive, and they've been watching me for 40 years. Rivers agreed to meet at a secure location the following morning. As Margaret hung up the phone, she felt relief for the first time in decades. But as she moved to close her curtains, she noticed a familiar car parked across the street, the same vehicle that had appeared whenever she'd considered breaking her silence. After 40 years of silence, the truth was finally starting to surface. But some secrets are so dangerous that people will kill to protect them. If you want to see how this incredible story ends, make sure you're subscribed with notifications turned on. Someone had been monitoring her calls, watching her movements, waiting for exactly this moment. Margaret realized that deciding to tell the truth might be the last decision she ever. Margaret Walsh had carried the truth for nearly 4 decades, but when she finally spoke, her revelation would shock investigators and destroy the last illusions about Cedar Key's dark past. The real killer had been hiding in plain sight all along. The Crossroads Diner sat 30 miles from Cedar Key, chosen specifically because it existed outside jurisdictions where corruption might compromise the investigation. Detective Amanda Rivers arrived first, selecting a corner booth with clear sightlines to all entrances. She brought backup officers positioned discreetly in the parking lot and recording equipment that would capture every word. Margaret Walsh entered looking like a woman approaching her own execution. At 71, she moved with the careful steps of someone who'd spent decades expecting violence. Her eyes swept the diner constantly, checking faces and exits with the paranoia of a person who'd lived in fear for 40 years. "Mrs. Walsh," Rivers said gently, "thank you for coming. I know this took courage." Margaret's hands trembled as she slid into the booth across from Rivers. "Courage," she repeated bitterly. "If I'd had courage, those girls would still be alive." Rivers activated the recording equipment after explaining Margaret's rights and obtaining consent. The older woman's voice was barely audible as she began speaking words that would rewrite everything authorities thought they knew about the Martinez case. "Jimmy didn't kill those girls," Margaret said, tears already flowing. "He was murdered to keep him quiet about who really did." Rivers leaned forward, maintaining steady eye contact. "Tell me what happened." Margaret's confession unfolded like a dam breaking after decades of pressure. Jimmy Walsh had been coerced into participating in a smuggling operation, blackmailed by someone who discovered his tax evasion and illegal fishing activities. Her husband was essentially another victim, forced into transportation and storage duties, but never involved in violence. Jimmy was terrified, Margaret continued, but not of going to prison. He was scared of the person running everything. Someone who could destroy lives with a phone call, someone the whole town trusted. The revelation came in words that made Rivers' blood run cold. Dr. Richard Edmonds was the mastermind. He'd been running the entire operation for years, using his medical practice to launder money and his pharmaceutical knowledge to eliminate anyone who threatened him. Rivers felt the world shift beneath her understanding. Dr. Edmonds, the respected physician who'd treated the Martinez family, who'd contributed to memorial funds, who'd been one of the most vocal supporters of finding the twins' killer. Margaret's voice gained strength as decades of suppressed truth poured out. Dr. Edmonds had used his position to build a criminal empire that reached from South American drug cartels to corrupt officials throughout Florida. His wife Patricia had been forced to help, threatened with harm to their children if she refused to provide medical supplies. On July 15th, Sarah and Jessica witnessed Dr. Edmonds executing a drug courier who tried to steal from the operation, Margaret explained. The girls had been photographing suspicious activities for over a week. When Edmonds realized they'd documented his crimes, he ordered Jimmy to capture them. Rivers processed the implications. The twins hadn't stumbled into danger. They'd been conducting their own investigation, documenting criminal activities with the thoroughness of professional journalists. Jimmy begged Dr. Edmonds to let the girls go, Margaret continued. He offered to take them somewhere far away where they could never identify anyone. but Edmonds said they were too dangerous to leave alive. The truth about the twins' final days emerged in details that would haunt Rivers for the rest of her career. Sarah and Jessica had been held captive for 3 days in a remote medical facility that Edmonds operated under the guise of treating migrant workers. During that time, Edmonds had tried to negotiate with higher-level criminals about how to handle the witnesses. Margaret's most devastating revelation concerned how the twins actually died. Dr. Edmonds had killed them with lethal injections on July 18th, making their deaths appear medical rather than violent. He'd disposed of their bodies using connections at the county morgue, where death certificates could be falsified and cremations arranged without family consent. They were murdered by someone who'd taken an oath to heal and protect life, Margaret whispered. And then he comforted their parents at the memorial service. Rivers immediately began corroborating Margaret's account through available records. Medical databases showed that Dr. Edmonds had access to all the drugs found in Jimmy Walsh's system. Financial records revealed suspicious transactions and offshore accounts that aligned with Margaret's timeline. Most damning was the discovery that Edmonds had purchased large quantities of lime and concrete during July 1985, ostensibly for construction projects that were never completed. The materials would have been perfect for disposing of bodies. The psychological manipulation was staggering in its cruelty. For 40 years, Dr. Edmonds had maintained his innocent facade by attending memorial services, contributing to scholarship funds, and even treating Roberto Martinez for depression related to his daughter's disappearance. He'd monitored the family's emotional state while knowing he was responsible for their suffering. "Why didn't you come forward before?" Rivers asked. Margaret's explanation revealed the depth of her terror. Dr. Edmonds had threatened to kill her children if she ever spoke the truth, demonstrating his willingness to commit murder by eliminating Jimmy Walsh when he became a liability. Margaret had lived in constant fear, but she'd also been trapped by her own complicity. She'd helped dispose of evidence and had benefited financially from her husband's forced participation. Dr. Edmonds is in his 80s now, but he's still watching everyone connected to the case, Margaret continued. He's been bribing officials to keep it closed, threatening witnesses, using his medical connections to access confidential information about investigations. Margaret's decision to finally speak had been triggered by her terminal cancer diagnosis. Facing death, she wanted to make peace with God and ensure the twins finally received justice. "I helped cover up their murders," she said, "but I won't take that sin to my grave." Rivers began planning arrest warrants, her mind racing through jurisdictional issues and evidence requirements. Dr. Edmonds was still alive, still free, still dangerous. But Margaret's testimony, combined with physical evidence and financial records, would finally bring him to justice. Margaret's phone rang as Rivers outlined next steps. The older woman answered automatically. Then her face drained of all color as she recognized the voice on the other end. "I know you talked to the police, Margaret." Dr. Edmonds' voice was calm, almost conversational. "You've made a terrible mistake. I've been protecting this town's secrets for 40 years, and I won't let you destroy everything now." Margaret dropped the phone like it was burning her hand. Rivers grabbed the device, but the line had gone dead. "He knows," Margaret whispered. "He knows everything we've discussed." Rivers realized their investigation had been compromised from the moment Margaret made contact. Dr. Edmonds had been monitoring communications, watching movements, preparing for exactly this scenario. The man who'd successfully covered up murders for 4 decades wasn't going to surrender without eliminating the last witnesses to his crimes. After 40 years of lies, the truth was finally exposed. But Dr. Edmonds wasn't going to surrender without a fight. If this revelation shocked you as much as it shocked Detective Rivers, hit that like button and share this video with anyone who loves true crime. Rivers activated her radio to call for immediate protection of potential witnesses, but she knew they were racing against time. Dr. Edmonds had spent decades perfecting the art of making people disappear, and he wouldn't hesitate to add Margaret Walsh to his list of victims. The hunt for a killer who'd hidden behind respectability for 40 years was about to become a race for survival. The final confrontation between good and evil was about to unfold in the quiet streets of Cedar Key. After 4 decades of hiding behind a mask of respectability, Dr. Richard Edmonds would face justice for Sarah and Jessica Martinez, but not without one last desperate attempt to escape the consequences of his crimes. Detective Rivers moved with precision born of urgency. Within hours of Margaret Walsh's revelation, federal marshals had placed her in protective custody at a secure facility outside state jurisdiction. Rivers coordinated with FBI agents and DEA officials, understanding that Dr. Edmonds' criminal network crossed multiple jurisdictions and required federal resources to dismantle. The investigation accelerated at breakneck speed. Rivers obtained search warrants for Edmonds' home, medical practice, and a storage facility he'd rented under the false name Robert Edwards. Tactical teams prepared for what could be a dangerous arrest. An 83-year-old man with nothing left to lose and access to enough pharmaceuticals to kill a small town. Remember, this suspect has been eliminating witnesses for 40 years, Rivers briefed the assault teams. He's proven he'll kill to protect his secrets, and he knows we're coming. The search of Dr. Edmonds' Victorian mansion yielded evidence that exceeded Rivers' expectations. Hidden behind false walls in his home office was a detailed journal documenting 4 decades of criminal activities. The leather-bound volumes read like a business ledger of death, with entries about the Martinez twins written in the same clinical handwriting that had signed their death certificates. July 18, 1985, eliminated witnesses to courier incident. Subjects proved resistant to interrogation. Disposal completed through established channels. Operation security maintained. The entries revealed a mind that viewed human life as an accounting problem. Edmonds had monitored the Martinez family for decades, tracking their emotional recovery and noting when their grief might pose investigative threats. He documented Roberto's depression, Elena's memorial activities, even the twins' younger cousin's graduation, all observed from the shadows by their killer. The storage facility contained physical evidence that transformed Margaret's testimony from accusation to irrefutable fact. Sarah's distinctive class ring sat in a plastic evidence bag alongside Jessica's gold bracelet, jewelry their parents had described but never found. Clothing that had been carefully preserved bore DNA evidence linking Edmonds directly to his victims. Financial records revealed the scope of Edmonds' empire. The smuggling operation had generated over $20 million across 3 decades, with profits laundered through medical investments and real estate purchases throughout the Southeast. Bank records showed payments to corrupt officials, judges, and law enforcement personnel who'd helped protect his operations. The evidence was so overwhelming that Edmonds' high-powered legal team, hastily assembled from Miami and Atlanta, privately admitted the case was unwinnable. Their only strategy became negotiating to avoid the death penalty in exchange for information about other crimes and victims. Rivers' investigation revealed corruption that reached into the highest levels of regional law enforcement. Edmonds had systematically corrupted judges, prosecutors, and police officials across multiple counties, creating a network of protection that had allowed him to operate with impunity for decades. The twins' murders represented just one crime in a career built on violence and intimidation. The arrest came at dawn on a Tuesday morning that would reshape Cedar Key forever. Federal agents surrounded Edmonds' mansion as the elderly doctor sat calmly at his breakfast table, reading the morning newspaper as if he'd been expecting them. "Dr. Richard Edmonds, you're under arrest for the murders of Sarah and Jessica Martinez," the lead agent announced. Edmonds showed no emotion as handcuffs were placed around his wrists. His only comment would become central evidence of his callous disregard for human life. "Those girls should have minded their own business." The statement was recorded by multiple agents and later played in court, demonstrating his complete lack of remorse for destroying 2 young lives and decades of family suffering. Frank Morrison attended the arraignment from his wheelchair, his body weakened by years of heart disease, but his mind sharp with vindication. Katie Morrison sat beside her father in the courthouse gallery, watching as the man who'd eluded justice for 40 years was finally held accountable. "Is that him, Dad?" Katie whispered as Edmonds was led into the courtroom. Morrison nodded, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. "That's the man who killed those girls. That's the man who's been laughing at us for 40 years. When the judge denied bail and remanded Edmonds to custody pending trial, Morrison felt something he hadn't experienced since 1985, peace. His 40-year quest for justice had finally reached its destination. Roberto Martinez traveled to the courthouse with Carmen and their extended family, his 78-year-old frame supported by a walker, but his spirit strengthened by approaching closure. The revelation that Dr. Edmonds, the physician who treated his depression after the twins disappeared, was actually their killer added psychological cruelty to an already heinous crime. He held my hand during their memorial service, Roberto told Rivers during their interview. He comforted me when I couldn't stop crying. And all the time, he knew exactly what had happened to my daughters because he'd killed them himself. The trial became a media sensation that exposed decades of corruption throughout Florida's law enforcement community. Rivers' investigation provided prosecutors with a detailed timeline of the twins' final days, revealing that Sarah and Jessica had been held captive for 3 days while Edmonds decided their fate. The most heartbreaking evidence came from letters the twins had written to their family during captivity, letters discovered in Edmonds' storage facility that were never delivered. Sarah's letter expressed love for her parents and dreams of becoming a marine biologist. Jessica's note included detailed descriptions of their captors, providing evidence that helped prosecutors secure additional convictions. Mom and Dad, if you're reading this, it means something terrible has happened to us. We love you more than words can say. We were trying to do something good, trying to help people by exposing criminals. Please don't blame yourselves. We made these choices because you taught us to stand up for what's right. Reading these final messages in court provided emotional catharsis while highlighting the unnecessary tragedy of their deaths. The twins had died because they tried to do the right thing, victims of their own courage and integrity. Dr. Edmonds' conviction on multiple counts of murder, conspiracy, and racketeering resulted in a life sentence without possibility of parole. At 83 years old, he would die in prison, ending a criminal career that had spanned nearly half a century. His conviction triggered additional investigations that exposed corruption throughout the region, resulting in dozens of arrests and convictions. The story concluded with a memorial service for Sarah and Jessica Martinez, attended by hundreds of community members who finally knew the truth about their disappearance. Roberto Martinez spoke about forgiveness and the importance of never abandoning hope for justice, his words carrying weight earned through decades of suffering. My daughters believed in truth, Roberto said, his voice strong despite his age. They died because they refused to ignore evil when they saw it. Today, their courage has finally been vindicated. The twins were laid to rest in a ceremony that celebrated their lives while acknowledging the decades of pain their family had endured. Flowers covered their graves, roses from classmates who'd become grandparents, lilies from friends who'd never forgotten, and daisies from children who'd grown up hearing stories about the Martinez sisters. Rivers reflected on the broader implications of the case as she watched the community heal. Corruption and silence had allowed evil to flourish unchecked for 40 years, but truth had eventually surfaced through the dedication of investigators who refused to accept convenient lies. The case served as a reminder that justice might be delayed, but persistence and courage could eventually overcome even the most sophisticated cover-ups. Rivers visited Frank Morrison one final time at the hospice facility where he spent his last days. The old detective was peaceful, his life's work finally complete. Those girls got their justice, Morrison said, his voice weak but satisfied. Took 40 years, but we never gave up. You never gave up, Rivers corrected. Without your investigation, none of this would have been possible. Morrison smiled, closing his eyes as he spoke his final words about the case that had defined his life. Justice delayed is not justice denied. It's just justice waiting for the right person to fight for it. After 40 years, Sarah and Jessica Martinez finally received the justice they deserved. If this story moved you, please like this video, subscribe to our channel for more cold cases that prove the truth always comes out, and share this story to honor the memory of 2 young women whose courage in seeking truth cost them everything. In Cedar Key, the sun set over waters that had kept their secrets for 4 decades. But now those secrets had been exposed, and 2 18-year-old girls could finally rest in peace, knowing their deaths had not been forgotten and their killer would never harm anyone again.